So for tonight's program, the stories that are never told, David Lyman discussing writing a memoir about the Vietnam War experience. We welcome David Lyman. He has, as I said, a very extensive career as an entrepreneur, a sailor, a storyteller, and a memoir writer. He, in 1973, founded the Maine Photographic Workshops, a school for photographers, filmmakers, and writers located in Rockport, Maine. Many of you may know that in its current incarnation as the Maine Media Workshops and College. So this gentleman has an extraordinary background. I hope we get to hear a lot about it tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. David Lyman.
For most of your career. I've been a journalist since I was a kid and studied at Boston University for a while before I went in the Naval Reserve and had another career. And then I ran newspapers in Vermont for a couple of years as a reporter, editor, photographer, publisher. And then I got hired to be the editor of a ski magazine, which was fantastic because it sent me all over the country skiing for free, writing about it and photographing it. And then I got frustrated doing that after 5 or 6 years, and heard that Bob Gelka, who was the director of photography of the National Geographic, was going to do a workshop in Aspen, Colorado at a small school called the Center of the Eye. And I said, it's a perfect opportunity to show him my portfolio of work in Vietnam and my work in the small towns of New England. And so I went up to the workshop, and he took a look at my portfolio and asked me if I made a living with what I showed him, which was a great humbling experience. I figured I wouldn't be working for the National Geographic anytime soon, but it was exactly what I needed. It kicked me in the pants and slapped me upside the face, and I figured I got to do something to get my career off of this plateau. And through a variety of just happenstances, somebody asked me what I was going to do the following summer, and I said, I'm going to start my own photography school on the coast of Maine. That was in 1970, the winter of 73. And we did. We started the first summer, and we had 200 students. I was amazed. I only lost $10,000. We did it a second year. I still lost $10,000, but we had 400 students. We'd hit on an untapped market. The SLR, the small camera, in Tri-X film, was now something that people could use because the cameras could calculate a lot of the exposures for you. You didn't have to know a great deal about the zone system. And people were pouring out of the woodwork to try to get together with other people that were photographers to find out how you did this stuff, how you get better at it. Instead of making snapshots, how do I make a photograph? And what is a photograph? With a photograph, one photograph can tell a story. So that's what we're looking for, is we're looking for pictures that excite people, that are surprises, that make them question. They're sort of a poem wrapped up in a frame on a piece of two-dimensional paper. You put a bunch of them together and you have an essay, a story essay, or a magazine spread, or a newspaper spread. You put them into a slideshow and you show them on a wall with some music, and you've got an incredible experience where you've taken somebody through a countryside, through somebody's life. One of the photographers that we got to teach at the workshop over the years, and I ran that school for 34 years, was Bill Allard. He was Mr. National Geographic photographer and writer. He was one of the only photographers that wrote his own stories. And he would do a slideshow when he was here teaching on Tuesday nights that would go on for 2 hours. And it was probably a dozen different stories that he'd photographed of the things that they sent him out to shoot, which was the Hutterites, the Amish, the American cowboy. He was very big with the American cowboy, the American West. He also did Peru. He did the Basque Country in Spain. And he would show these slideshows to appropriate music that he had spent all winter listening to in his van driving. I said, oh, that'll be a good one for this one. And we would sit there glued to our chairs for 2 hours, wondering not when it's going to end. We don't want it to end. He had taken us through pictures and music to a marvelous trip around the world, into people's lives. Photography can be magical. And I discovered that when I was in high school, when I got my first camera, which was a speed graphic, and a darkroom equipment. My buddy Al Seymour and I, a high school buddy, and I, we were in business, in and out of business for years and years and years. And he's still a friend of mine. Spends his summer just down here in the harbor on his tugboat in the summertime. Well, off to engineering school. That didn't last too long. That lasted 2.5 years. And then I went to Boston University to study journalism, and that lasted another 1.5 years. And then I realized it was costing me a lot of money, and I wasn't learning what I wanted to learn because I was already working in radio and television when I was in school. So I said, I don't need this. Of course, when I dropped out of BU, I was eligible for the draft. So I was 23 years old at the time, and I had to sign up for the reserves, figuring that would solve the problem. It didn't. I still went to Vietnam, but I went as a journalist, a Navy journalist, JO3, assigned to a CB outfit, MCB 71, and we went through training. I was the second enlisted person. I was the second person in the battalion when it started to reform. There was a chief ahead of me, and then he turned me into a yeoman for a couple of months until they got enough people in the office to be able to run stuff. And then I did my own job, which was reporting on what the unit was doing. And then we went over to Vietnam, spent 7 months there. The unit came back. The unit spent 7 months here retraining, and then they went over for another 7 months. So most of the guys had 14 months in service in Vietnam. Being with the Seabees was fun. It was slightly dangerous. We got mortared almost weekly. Road mines blew up around us. There were pot shots being taken at some of the units that were out in the fields working on the quarry or working on some highways or bridges. No one got killed in the outfit. We drank a lot. We talked a lot. We stuck it out through the heat. The reason we didn't do a full year hitch in country is because the work that the men were doing was extremely strenuous. We were doing 6-day weeks, and there were 12-hour days. Building stuff, moving stuff, digging ditches, blowing up rock quarries to be able to get crushed rock to make roads and foundations with. So it was a lot of hard work that the Seabees were doing. What I came to realize, two things about being there, and it's in the book, was we spent a tremendous amount of American money and American wealth and American lives for a cause that was not there. There was no real reason for us to be in Vietnam. And I didn't realize that until the last month I was there, when I got on board an airplane, a C-141 full of silver coffins, and there was 150 guys in there that were dead. They were going home. Those were the coffins. The other thing I realized is that we had built in Chu Lai this huge sandbank, huge beach sand area. We built a huge military complex that was the equal of almost any in the States. 60,000 men and a few women lived there. By the time we had left and built a lot of the containments, a lot of the barracks and the companies, that's more people that are in Portland, Maine. We built a city in 3 years. My job was to document the work that the men were doing, and almost as a PR person was to be able to show other people in the service, show the brass upstairs and the folks at home what their guys were doing over in Vietnam. And that for me was the first calling of, I really had something that I could do and I was good at. I was good at the design part of putting the pages together and the different typefaces and type sizes that we would use, making the photographs, developing the film, making the contacts, making the prints, sequencing the prints, sizing them, getting them into the publication, going up and working in Stars and Stripes, working with type, with lead type off of a linotype machine, and putting those chunks of lead together into galleys to form up the pages, and then the thing was printed on offset and delivered back down to Vietnam so we can send it out to our subscription list. When I got out of the service, I realized this is one thing I can do, and I'm good at it. So that's why I went into the newspaper business in Vermont, publishing and editing small weekly newspapers. 50 years from then, I'm sitting around semi-retired running, that's something I should do. I should get back to that stuff and see if I can turn it into a book. I'd already written about 4 other books, none of them been published, but it sometimes takes the 4 that are unpublished to be able to get you ready to write the one that does get published. So writing is not easy. But it's a fun thing to do when you know it's cranking and doing well. So I just took the magazines, and I'll show you a couple of them here. This is the transit. Yep, here we go. I'm going to go screen share now, folks. Okay, over here. Share. This is the front page of a couple of the issues. So you can see the different stories, the headlines, all the type stuff like that. This was fun for me to do. I have dyslexia. I can't spell. I can't remember people's names. I have to write everything down. But I can get the story told. And the way I started the book, and I will show you the table of contents in a minute, but I just took the text, because I still have copies of these, and I read them into Pages dictation on my iMac on my desk. And amazing, it comes out and it spells perfectly, better than I do. And I could capture all the stuff that I had written 50 years ago. So I did that, and then I would take the stories and I would turn them into stories that would be appropriate for a memoir. I had read probably 20 or 30 memoirs to try to get a handle on what they were, and I've taken workshops with the Maine Publisher and Writers Alliance. I've taken about a dozen of those. So it took me a full year from the time I started reading in the text and shaping that into context that would make reading in a memoir appropriate. And then as I started working on this, I sent off a pitch letter to a bunch of magazines, a bunch of newspapers, and McFarland Publishing down in Virginia sent a note back and said, we'd be interested, can you send us some draft? So I sent them a draft. They got back to me within a week and said, we like the concept, get rid of the ships, we just want to know about Vietnam. I went and looked on their website, and they had published already over 120 memoirs of Vietnam, all by Army and Marine grunts, enlistment. A few by officers, but most were just by the guys in the ditches. When you go to Amazon, you'll find there's probably about 150 or 175 memoirs from Vietnam from other publishers. It was nice working with McFarland. They didn't give me a lot of feedback. They said, too many chapters, compress them into fewer. We don't want to see any more than 20 chapters. I said, geez, I got at least 80. Then when I finished the text, which took a year, and sent it off to them, they said, fine, we'll put it through proofreading and then we'll send it to Galley, but you've got to send us the pictures and a list of where you want them. So finally, so I sent them off 200. They said, no, we only want 30. So I sent them 60. They said, no, we only want 30. So we got down to 131 images in the book. The structure, writers often complain about they need structure. I need structure, I need structure. And that's what they need at the end of the writing process. What they need at the beginning of the writing process is just to write. Every day, write something that you can write. It doesn't have to fit in with anything else you've written, and you may throw it out anyway, because we throw out 80% of the stuff we've written anyway, so you just got to write. The timeline for a memoir is one way to easily do it, because you just go by the dates. But as you go into the material, you realize this needs some backstory. They don't understand me or why I'm reacting to this unless they know what my father said, or unless they know what we kids did. When I go into the training period of when we were going through combat training with the Marines, I said, this is just like what us kids used to do when we were 10, 12 years old, off in the woods with our BB guns shooting at each other. We're playing war games because that was during the Korean War period. So the book just covers all of our training and the deployment and part of my life on the outside, some of my friends. There is a chapter, now this is interesting, when I was telling the kids about the book, and a lot of it was been written for my kids, they said, there's no sex, right? I said, what do you mean? So there is a chapter called I Got to Get Laid. And luckily, it's not graphic. It is funny, and it does tell something about that era we were in. So the stories that are in the book. This is a sample of just the chapters of what the guys were doing. This is a story about this. This is a section of the book. Where do we go here? Stories. Oh, no, not CB training. Well, there's a CB training. I won't get into that right now, but I want to get into arriving in Vietnam. The Beehive. Yeah, the Beehive. That's not the Beehive. Here we go. This is what it was like every night. This is the EM Club, the bar at the Enlisted Men's Club. There were 4 bars on the base. There was the EM Club, the AC Doocy Club, which is for the second and first class, AC Doocy, yeah. And then there was the Chiefs Club, and there was the Officers Club. This picture here is an aerial of our camp. When the camp was first set up in '65, it was all just tents. But the different CB outfits that came in every 6 months began to put together a more permanent facility. The guys that had their hooches down on the beach had a really good deal. We had three rows of concertina wire that protected us from the beach because the VC could come ashore on the beach. This is that's what the beach was like. Here, as I said, there wasn't bad duty. This is a graphic of the beach, of our compound. Mess halls are mess halls. We got a lot of, every other week, we got a USO tour through. A lot of Filipinos and New Zealanders. That was the EM Club from the outside. It was just a perfect, a perfect tropical bar. That's the AC Doocy Club. This is the Honey Bucket crew, which we had 4 holers scattered around the base. And it was somebody's job, 2 guys, to go out and pull out the barrels that sat underneath the holes and pour, I can't remember if it's gasoline or diesel fuel on them, and burn the stuff up, then put the barrels back. That's the sick bay. There we go, back to that again. Okay. One of the things that the publishers wanted, they wanted 80 words for the story, and for the book. And I didn't come up with 80 words. I came up with about 60. So they suggested some flash forwards. So I did put together a series of bios on the guys that were with me in the outfit. The ones in the middle are the CO and the XO, and then Tuffy Lake over here was the head of engineering. Dick Stapleman was he was a second and a third class equipment operator who was one of my best buddies over there. So that there's more stories in the book about them. But on Sunday, our only day off, I went out and did something for myself. I went out into the villages near where we were and photographed the people. The pictures are square because I was using a Bronica 6 by 6 centimeter medium format camera because it had a lot more resolution. And this is the best body of work that I brought back from the war. And for me, it still resonates as a good look at that place. Now, if you go and look on Google Maps, the area where we were, the airstrip is still there. The big concrete 2-mile-long SAC runway is still there, but the SAC runways for the jets, the small fighter jets, is gone. But in its place, the Chu Lai has become the Chu Lai Industrial Complex, which is a huge equipment manufacturing there's a car assembly plant. There's a shipbuilding facility. And the villages where we were, where you can see these huts being built, is now it looks like any middle class town in Asia. Very prosperous now. But for me, going into the boondocks like this and photographing, this was as close as I've ever gotten to a National Geographic assignment. And that's what I felt like I was out there. I was doing work that would be in National Geographic. I didn't shoot much color. A couple of reasons for the only color you could really shoot over there was Ektachrome. Getting it processed was a problem. I did shoot a couple of rolls and had it processed, but the colors weren't that good. So I did everything in black and white because black and white is what I could reproduce in my publication. Now these guys here, that's in 67. Those guys now are 65 years old. Those kids, they were 10 years old then. This one's called Sitting on the Fence. So that was a body of work that I got to go back one more, and the fishing village. Yeah. This is one of my favorite photographs because of the design. This is, so right on the South China Sea, about 2 miles outside of our wire, our barricades to find the Chu Lai camp, was a village, and a fishing village, and that's where I would go on Sundays. I couldn't go alone. I had to go with at least 4 guys, fully armed, with a case of beer and a case of sea rats, and we would go out and spend the whole day driving around and making photographs. And the guys used to love playing with the kids. And now where this boat's being built now, there's a huge shipbuilding facility. These boats are made out of woven reeds, and then they cover them with pitch, with tar. We'll get through this in a minute here. Okay. There's nothing else. The book is here. So the book is about 230 pages. It sells for $35 on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I get paid 10% of what the book sells for from the publisher. If the publisher sells the book for $35, then I make $3.50. If it's sold to Amazon, it's sold for 50%, so I only get $1.75. But I can buy the book for half price if I buy 100. So I've right off the bat bought 100, and I've got about 50 left. So I can now sell them at 25, which is $10 cheaper than anybody else, and I still make a $5 more profit. So this is what this is off of this website. I've sold a few of them. And what's this? Book reviews. I've had a few book reviews, mostly in military publications. So that's I'm going to start with something else now. Okay. So I'll stop sharing. I'll start talking about writing. Writings, for me, it's not hard to do. It's hard to do well. So when I started the book, I'd had a friend of mine who was at the workshop for many years, and Bonnie Durrance, and she does editing for people that have projects. She'd helped me with a book, with a memoir I'd done on my 3 or 4 years down in Cuba when we were doing workshops, photography and film workshops in Cuba. And I said, I'm going to do this one on Vietnam. So she said, well, I'll help you with that. So I would send her off a chapter, and she would send it back with no corrections, just colored in paragraphs. And the colors were green, keep it; red, get rid of it; blue, it needs work. And that's all I needed. I needed somebody to keep me honest to the pathway of of writing the book and keeping the story going. Because sometimes I get off on a tangent. Sometimes I'm telling people, and she says, "You're telling, you're supposed to be showing," which means you got to bring somebody by the hand and say, "Here, let me tell you a story." And you got to make them get into the story with you. And that's one of the tricks that writers have got to acquire. So, so what I'm interested in is helping other people. I always have been that way. That's why I started the workshop. I thought I was going to be able to get better as a photographer because I'd started this photography school. In 34 years, I never took a course. I learned a lot of other stuff about creativity and about the art world and about photographic technology and about how to build a business and how to build a school and how to get it accredited to make it a college. But I didn't learn much more about photography other than just having it rub off on me. But writing is something I've always done, and I've gotten better because I've been writing. So if you have a story to tell, and it can be a magazine story, it can be an essay, it can be a letter to somebody, it can be a book, it can be a fiction book. There's two decent fiction books out on Vietnam. One is, I've got them, they're in the book, and they're on the website also. One of them is very, very good, and it's thick. It's a big, thick, self-published book, but it's a great story. It's fiction based on reality. And then there's a couple more that are short. One's called the Dirt Navy or something like that. So if you go get those, they're interesting to read. And the more memoirs you read, the better you're going to get at writing your own stories. This is what you do. Okay. First thing, I'm giving a class now in writing. The first thing you do is you write a scene. Put us in a place. Visually, the temperature, the light, the afternoon, the time of day, light coming through windows, it's raining, you can hear it on the roof. There's a wind blowing and the trees are rattling against the windows. Put us in a place and as much detail as you can imagine or remember, put into that scene. So we're sitting in that room with you, experiencing what you're experiencing, visually, sound, smell, even memory. Okay, that's a scene. That sets the stage. That's like you go into a theater and the curtain parts and you're in someone's living room. Look at all the details in there. The next is to come up with one prime character and a secondary character. And the secondary character can be a buddy, or it can be an antagonist. It can be the enemy. It can be the one that is trying to get something from you. Characters have got to speak. They got to have some dialogue. Learning to write dialogue, it comes easy for me, but some people have struggled with writing dialogue. You just have to get better at it by doing it and listening to how people talk. You normally don't do that. You listen to what they're saying so you can get what they're talking about, but listen to their tone of voice, listen to their use of words, and listen to and watch their body English as they tell you the story. Are they sitting relaxed, or are they got their legs crossed and their arms crossed across their chest? Are they uptight, or are they really having a good time telling the story? Do they get animated, get up and walk around the room? Characters should be told a lot through dialogue. And it's dialogue, internal dialogue and external dialogue. External is you're talking to somebody else. Internal dialogue is what you're thinking, you're talking to yourself. And when I started writing the Vietnam book, there was a lot of times when I was actually talking to myself, asking questions and giving answers, one side of my brain to the other side of my brain. There was two people, and Bonnie said, "What are you doing?" I says, "This is the way I think." I talk to myself in my head about, "Are you going to go there? Don't you think that's stupid?" That kind of stuff. So you get a scene and you got two characters. Now you got to have some action. So write a scene of action. Any scene of action will be fine. Tell us how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. We, at the workshops, when we would have a crew of green filmmakers come in, kids or adults that wanted to move over into filmmaking, they would, I'd say, okay, first afternoon assignment, go out and change a tire. The what? Yeah, you're going to film the process of changing a tire. That's all you need to know. That's the setup. Do it any way you want. And it was amazing because they'd be like 3 or 4 units in each class. They'd all grab a camera and they'd all go out and they'd work, in teams of 2 or 3. And they sometimes would put a dramatic story to it. Sometimes they'd put a he meets she story to it. Sometimes they would just do it as a mechanical, this is what you do to change a tire. It's a good opportunity to explore your imagination, but get something that you can talk about that explains action. There's a lot of it in my CV book because I had to explain how things were being done, how things were being made, how towers were being built and deployed, how they were fixing stuff and installing a runway, repairing runways that were damaged by bombs and mortars and stuff. Okay, now when you get a bunch of those, if you can put them together like this, then you've got a story gun. That's the story. It's there. It's all done. Just weave the 4 or 5 elements that you have created. After a while, you're going to be able to do that as you go through. You'll just put a scene together with a few lines, a few sentences of description. That's enough. Okay, I got you set. Somebody walks into the room and sees somebody sitting in a chair in the dark. Dialogue. Anything wrong? Yes. Sit down. What? Those 2 things all of a sudden set up the drama. There's a question that the reader is, shit's going to hit the fan. That's how you start getting people engaged in what the story is going to be. That's fiction writing, but it can also be memoir. And a lot of the stuff I've written in the current memoirs I'm doing does that. It hopefully that at the end of a chapter, I've posed a big question. How the hell is he going to get out of this now? Okay. That's my course in writing. There's a lot more that can be said. As soon as I finish this next book, maybe I will. I have 4 more books to write. One on my early years, which is about 80% done. One on the jobs I've had and what I've learned by working in this world. That's about 80% done. Then if I can get one of those off my desk, I'm going to start on the workshops book. The workshops book is the history of the 34 years that I ran and the workshop and what I discovered by the creative process and about creative people and about ego and about the inner drive of an inner artist. And that'll be the hardest one to write. But when I finish that, then I figure I'll be 90. That's about it. I want to hear from other people now if they have got stories or they've got questions about writing stories or putting a book together or whatever.
Thank you, David. Well, while you're thinking of your questions, and again, you can type them in or we can you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question to David. I wanted to ask you, getting back to veterans writing stories, what have you read or what has been your experience of writing as therapy and what would be your advice for people who are struggling with overcoming not wanting to revisit some of those memories in order to do this writing?
I have got 40 of these books. They're artist sketchbooks, 8.5 by 11, and they are full of my hand scratching. And these are journals, daily journals. So the dates, this is June 8th to December 31, 1995. They start at about 1980, and they go through, the books actually only go through until about 2000. And then I didn't have time to write, but I would squeeze stuff in during the day on my computer. So I've moved my journals over onto my computer now. Journal writing, I think, and most people in the writing business would say, yeah, write a journal. It's amazing how much stuff is in there that you can, the Cuba book, which is a full-length book with a lot of photographs, all came out of the journals. When I started to write the Cuba book, I started writing it from memory. And I said, I got to go check that. So I went back, pulled out one of the journals for that period, and I said, it's already written. I just have to read it. So keep a journal. And what I do is a lot of my creativity comes at night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So I take my iPhone, don't turn a light on, but I fire up the iPhone and I will send myself an email. And I did one this morning. The book on my early years is going to be called The Lake. I was growing up on a lake in New England. And so one of the titles is going to read The Perfect Summer. Just one chapter, The Perfect Summer. Okay. So anything else, Julia?
Was there anyone else who wanted to go ahead and raise your hand, and you can get unmuted to ask him a question, or if you wanted to discuss an experience that you had? Oh, here's Gary. All right, Gary. You can go ahead and try to unmute yourself. There you go.
I have a question. In terms of writing in general, typing versus audio.
Whatever works for you.
I'm not much of a typer.
I do both.
I see.
I mean, I can't touch type. I still have to look at the keys.
You can't get the words on the page. Years.
So, David, I think
now, the other thing. What software do you use?
I have an iPad, and I have an old, relatively old PC.
Okay. The iPad has pages.
Really,
no, stop. The iPad has pages. Pages has dictation. That little microphone in the corner. Speak your book. Now, what will come out is text. That's the first draft. You'll do another 30. Okay, another 30. But every time you go read what you've written, this is I quoted this for 50 years. All you need to do to be a writer is to write well enough so that when you read what you wrote, it puts you back in touch with a fictive dream. That was by John Gardner in a book called what the hell was it called? On Writing Well. And yes, that's right. You just write anything and then put it away. There was a comedy writer that taught here at the workshops. I think of his name in a minute. And Stanley Ralph Ross. He wrote some fantastic television series. He wrote the Wonder Woman TV series. He wrote Batman. He was the one that brought Batman and Wonder Woman to the screen. He taught comedy writing for us. I was out at his place one winter in LA, and he showed me his office. It's incredible. I've written a chapter on that. And he said, I got a tip for you. When you write, turn off the screen. Just type. It'll be garbage. When you come in the morning, you'll say, geez, this is a bunch of shit. But then you say, oh, no, look at that. There's a gem. You wouldn't have come out if you had been watching what you were writing, because the internal editor we have always is tripping us up saying, oh, no, go back, fix that. That's the wrong word. Oh, you spelled that wrong. That screws up the flow. So see if you can, maybe you can, maybe you can't. Try dictation. Just talk extemporaneous. You don't give a damn because nobody's going to see it except you. So you never have to be embarrassed about what you do.
Thank you.
Eventually, you will be embarrassed because you're going to have to show it to somebody else. So I send my stuff to Bonnie. I even send the magazine articles I'm writing for the yachting magazines. I send her off, and she says, all right, here's the corrections to make. And I was given an assignment of 3,000, no more than 3,000 words for Cruising World. And I came up with 3,700. I said, Bonnie, can you get this down to below 3,000? She did. Read fine.
David, we have a question that came in, and it's also a comment. It says, your photographs in Vietnam are wonderful, especially the fishing village. I may have missed if you said it in your introduction, but did you have formal photographic training? Who were you influenced by? Who are your photographic influences?
I learned photography in the late 50s, in the early 60s. There was no classes you could take. BU did have one photojournalism course by Mr. Smith. And he was a grumpy old guy, and so I never took his class. But I figured I was a photographer by the time I went to BU. I learned from the paperwork that comes with the film. I learned by one book called the Graflex Handbook. which was a book about the speed graphic press camera. And my buddy Al Seymour, he and I bumped off of each other and struggled through and learned how to expose film and develop it and make prints and try to make the prints better. There was a couple of other commercial photographers in Boston that we would freelance for, and they were good feedback. And there was the editors at Associated Press that would look at the stuff I brought in to try to sell, and they wouldn't say much. They just throw back the stuff they didn't want. That means, well, it didn't work too well. I learned mostly by doing and finding out what people responded to and what I responded to. So no, there was nobody except after I started the workshop. Then I started appreciating the work of Paul Caponegro and of a lot more of the photojournalists and some of the New York advertising photographers. And Ernst Haas was a great mentor of mine. But it was less for photography at that stage of my life, as I was in my mid-30s or late 30s, that it was living the life, living an artistic life, which they did and which I did in my own way.
I have a
question. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. Do you happen to know of any groups that you could recommend? Some people do just need a little bit more hand-holding during the writing process. Do you know of any places that are doing workshops that are geared specifically towards veterans?
There's two. One is my old school, Main Media.
Okay.
They have a whole new writing program now, which is pretty good. It's expensive. I'm taking a workshop of 2 weeks, Zoom, like this, starting the end of the month. And it's with, do I have his book here? No, I don't. It's beside the bed. I can't remember his name right now, but he's a well-known memoir writer. I'm struggling to get through half of his book because I don't like the life he's leading. That's the big problem I have with a lot of memoirs, is that they're told by people who are having problems with alcoholic parents and child abuse and failure in life and all that stuff. And I says, no, that's not my memoir. My memoir is a lot of fun. Okay, so there's Main Media, but I have found that the Main Writers and Publishers Alliance in Portland has a weekend workshops, Saturday, usually all day Saturday, a good portion of Saturday, 4 or 5 hours on Saturday. They have a bunch of Main writers. Some people come up from Boston. So just go into mainwriters.org and you can join. It's, I don't know, $45, I guess, $60. The workshops are $60 for a day, to $75, something like that. And I've taken more than a dozen of them. And mostly just to be with other writers and to hear other people's stuff. Sometimes you get some good feedback on your own stuff. And that's what you're looking for, is a critique.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention that that is something we used to do at the Camden Public Library. We'd have a lot of those workshops at the library. And so hopefully when it's safe to meet again in person, you can always check with the Camden Public Library or the other local libraries for free and some for-fee classes.
I have to tell you a couple of things. Now, it's being very sexist on my part. Most of these workshops are attended by women. I'll be in a memoir writing workshop. I'm the only guy, or maybe 2 of us. The rest are 8, 9 are women. And it becomes a chat fest. It's social. And I don't want that. I want to get right down to it. So I think Zoom is a much better way. 4 of the women that were in one of my workshops and myself said, we're going to continue this. Let's do it on Zoom. So we did that for 1.5 years. And that was helpful. You would send off the week before 2,000 words. And people would read it, mark it up. We would get together one day. They would read the 2,000 words, and then everybody would chime in with a particular pointed observation, suggestion. The big thing was, what's missing? What didn't you answer? Where is the drama? Who is this person? A lot of times you said, well, if you read the 2 chapters before that, you would have known. So I think the Zoom is actually a better way to do these writing helpful workshops like we're doing like this, because I don't need the social stuff. I just need feedback on what I've done.
Sure. And I mean, the fact that so many are being held on Zoom, that just really allows you to toss the net even wider or get more specific, looking for the right type of writing group for you. Real quick before we wrap up, I want to know, is there anybody else? It looks like Rodney has a question. He's got his hand raised, so I'm trying to unmute you. Rodney, you can try to unmute yourself. It's not working yet. Let's unmute you again. Do you see anything that says unmute?
Media volume set.
Oh, there we go.
You're on, Rodney.
Hi, David. I just want to let you know that I read your book. I was cruising the Camden Library, and I came across a book that said about in Chu Lai, the Seabees, and I couldn't put your book down. I mean,
Really?
at times, I almost went to tears. I told Cheryl, I said, I could almost written this book myself because I spent 68, 69 with the Riverboat Patrol Unit as a storekeeper in the Mekong Delta and the Cambodian border. And like yourself, I kept a journal of my duty in Vietnam, plus a whole bunch of pictures. But also is that because I was a reservist, I stayed in reserves and finally retired as a Master Chief. But I spent 2 years as a CB with the CBs out of Davisville. So I'm very familiar with Davisville and the hooches and the barracks there. So I'm very familiar. But what I try to do, then retired, is that therapy. I'm not going to write a book, but I like magazine articles and I like letters to editor. And the reason why I write them is two things. Is to let the most people here never grew up in the Camden area, to let them know how it was when we grew up, and also let them know that a lot of us came back to Vietnam. There was a stereotype. I know very well I was not hired for jobs because they saw my resume. I went to Vietnam. I know I was discriminated against. But I want to let them know that we came back. We got back into our own personal, professional lives. Most of us did very well for ourselves. I know plenty of Vietnam veterans around here, and you would know. And they always come to me and say, "We Vietnam when you were there," etc. So there's a real close camaraderie among the Vietnam veterans in this particular area. And they've done well for themselves. And they're anything but the stereotype of what they made us out to be in the late 60s, 1970s. So when I do my writing in terms of letters to the editor, I, like yourself, I conceptualize and write it in my head. In the morning, when I get up, I'll start typing it out. So yeah. So again, great book, great book. I loved it.
Thank you. Where do you live? Where do you live?
Well, I grew up in Camden, but I live in Rockland now. I'm a Camden native. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anyone else?
Ben Allison, did you wave your hand that you've got something to write? I mean, you certainly have written enough in your life.
I've got a little different side of the story than Rodney. David, question. Did you by any chance, were you sent to the MultiService journalism school in Fort Harrison, Indiana?
No, that's mentioned in the book, is that the Navy has a marvelous training program because it's one of the most technically advanced of all of the services. We've got too many ships, too many weapon systems, too many airplanes, helicopters. We got more gear than the Army and certainly the Marines, because we give the Marines everything we don't want.
Well, there were some Navy guys there. I went to that school
well, being in the reserves,
early 60s.
I only did 2 years active duty. And they weren't going to send me off to do 9 months of training, and I only got 9 months of work out of me. So no, they wouldn't send me to the school. I had to do it up through the ranks, which means you could order through the T&E office the manual, the training manual, read it, sit for a test. If you passed the test, you got rated when there was a billet open, and that's what happened to me. I passed the test. I took the test in April. It was passed in May. Then I had to sit and wait for 3 months, and then in August I was rated as a third class and sent off to the Seabees. So no, I didn't go to school, but I heard about it. Now, one of the things
this was what I went to was 8 weeks of secondary training after basic, which I did at Fort Dix, but I never finished that school. I got in trouble. I was a bad soldier. In fact, when they finally discharged me with an undesirable discharge in August, I think, of 69, I was still in that school company. The lowest ranking man had been there longer than the commanding officer. So I have a very undistinguished career, but I spent 6 months.
Wasn't there a journalism school called a Camp Slocum?
No, this was maybe, but this was Fort Benjamin Harrison. There were Navy guys, Marines, Air Force.
Was it just journalism? Because There were two, and I remember the guy that replaced me he was a third class. When I got out, they brought another third class in, and he had just come out of one of the schools. And he said, when they heard I was replacing you, they all said, "You got big boots to fill, kid," because the newspaper that I did, the Transit, got awarded as the top unit publication in the services for the 3 quarters we were over there. So that was a big feather in my cap, and it was in the front page of one of the magazines. And there's a great story in a book about showing that paperwork to the colonel at the Stars and Stripes, saying, "Hey."
At any rate, besides for Indianapolis, Fort Benjamin Harrison, I spent 6 months in the Army stockade in Fort Riley, Kansas, for possession of 1/1600 of a gram of marijuana.
Did you get Zoom?
I did. But I didn't get no sound.
Sorry?
Couldn't get the sound.
You can't hear me?
Warm apple crisp with vanilla ice cream?
Oh. Jerry's getting ice cream.
Want some warm apple crisp with
You
vanilla
could mute
ice cream?
him.
Yeah.
Do you have it? Okay. Ben, do you have a desire to write something artistic rather than something electronic? No,
Ben,
you're
we have to
muted.
unmute you.
Yeah.
I wrote about it before I even left the Army for a draft resistors group
Ooh.
in Indianapolis. And I was just reading it again. I think you'd get a kick out of it. It's actually, it's pretty good writing. It's raw, but it was.
You want to send me? You want to send me a copy?
I will.
Okay, good. Do you have my email, don't you?
I do. Well, and I'm looking at your website, but anyway, what I saw was very often the people in the stockade, they were almost all AWOLs. That was very unusual to be a marijuana case. Most bases weren't court-martialing people for that. I was on this base full of college students. That was their big problem. But it was often guys who'd been in Vietnam and could not, be a good soldier when they got back, and kept going AWOL and getting caught and getting court-martialed, released early, going AWOL again. It was like a constant rotation. And
we had guys in our outfit that were screw-ups. Every outfit has them. Guys that just can't handle the chain of command. They can't handle the authority. They've had a father that was abusive or was not abusive, and they are going. There's some stuff in the book about a couple of the guys that never got out of the mess hall. They'd been in the service for 2 years. They never got out of the mess hall duty because they were always busted back down to an E2.
Yeah, I wouldn't say these guys were necessarily meant to be screw-ups. They'd had tough wars. They'd really seen a lot of violence, and they were messed up. A lot of them had drug problems, and but yours
wasn't a messed up problem. Yours was just a fun problem.
Well, I felt very fortunate. I mean, it was a very embarrassing thing to happen from my background, but my family was supportive of me. And by contrast, a lot of these guys in the stockade had enlisted, they had, real ambition to get out of rural. It was pretty much all guys who
unworkable
from those states, white guys, and then black guys from the major cities like Chicago and St. Louis. That stockade covered that whole area. So it was a pretty nasty place because they were trying to they couldn't hold all the AWOLs they were. So they give them 6 month sentence and then suspend the sentence after 30 days. Half the guys that walked out of there would be back in within 2 days because they went AWOL again, because they were trying to get out of the service. They didn't care about the discharge. So it was a pressure kind of environment.
I think Gary's got something.
Gary, you had a comment, Gary?
Yes. I came back from Vietnam, and I checked in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and my hair was a little long, and I looked a little ruffled, and I really had a give a shit attitude at the time. And they said, you know, get out of here, go get a haircut before I'm even going to talk to you. And I walked out and walked off the base and went AWOL. So
What happened to you?
Well, my uncle, who was only a year or so older than me, was an officer. And I went out and hung out with him for about 4 days and finally said, you know, you got to go back. So I came with him. And it was interesting, the sergeant started, you know, yelling at me because my uncle came in and he was in civilian clothes. And like, who are you? And he says, it's second lieutenant, you know, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it was like, yes, sir. And, you know, everything was fine. So I ended up with just getting, I think they busted me back to private, 2 weeks stuck on the base and, you know, but I was about 9 months from getting out at that point.
There's a chapter in a book called Cinderella Liberty. And my buddy, Dick Stapleman, who was the captain's driver when we were on the base in Davisville, they lost his records. So he couldn't get paid. Now, have you ever watched the movie Cinderella Liberty? It was directed by Mark Rydell, and the cinematographer was
but I did lose my records.
Bill Zsigmond. They both taught at my workshop, but the story is the same. So he comes into my office and he's pissing and moaning about he hasn't been paid in 2 months. His kids and his wife at home are running out of money. He could go back and work for a month and make twice as much as he would make in a week in the Navy. So the chaplain comes in, closes the door and says, sit down, Dick. He says, you're going home, but you're going to do it this way. You have a return airline ticket and you keep your sea bag packed. You're not going AWOL. Your what's the one beneath that? Your unauthorized liberty or something like that?
UA?
Yeah, unauthorized liberty. So
yeah,
he did that. He went
unauthorized absence.
Yeah, unauthorized absence. So he flew home, and 2 months later, and finally they found his record, and the chaplain comes and says, get a hold of Dick. He's got to come back. So Dick went down to the recruiter's office, said, I got to go back to the base. I've been, they said, okay. So they put him on an airplane, and they paid his way back. He did go to captain's mess, but there was no court martial. They busted him from second class down to third class. They didn't give him the honey bucket detail, which he was afraid he was going to get. And that was fine. So, you do what you got to do. There is a way to make the system work for you. And I found that when I went into the service is that there was a chief on the carrier that I was on when I first went in active duty. And he said, kid, you're here for 2 years. For Christ's sakes, make the best of it. I said, okay. So I did. I mean, I wound up being a journalist, and that's what I wanted to do anyway. So that's what I've always said to my son, as a matter of fact. I said, Havana, you're in this school for 3 years. Make the best of it. Don't complain about it. Just whatever you do, make sure you come out on top.
Well, David, I think that's really, really great advice to end on. We're a little bit over now, so we do have to wrap up. But I think make the best of it is, what else can you do? I think we're all kind of in that right now, trying to make.
Just a second, I have to do something for my cameras. Sure. I have to do a clap stick so I can pair these up. Okay, good, done.
All right.
Thank you, folks. It's been a joy. I'd do this again any day.
Thank you so much. We've really appreciated that this evening. And thank you all for joining us.
See you later. Hey, Ben, I'll see you around. Send me that article.
Okay, we'll do.
Good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.